Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Andrew Peach, and in the early hours of Saturday the 29th of October, these are our main stories. The husband of Nancy Pelosi, the US House Speaker, is in hospital after being attacked at home by an intruder wielding a hammer and shouting, "Where's Nancy?" A member of the Russian parliament has reportedly said that newly mobilised troops are being sent to fight in Ukraine without proper training. In an apparent change of heart, Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, says no suspended accounts will be reinstated until a new moderation council completes a review. Also in this podcast...
You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
One of the leading figures of rock and roll, Jerry Lee Lewis, has died at the age of 87. A man's been charged with attempted murder following an attack on the husband of the US Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Paul Pelosi, who's 82, is being treated in hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. The chief of the San Francisco Police Department, Bill Scott, said police witnessed the attack and took the suspect into custody.
Our officers observed Mr. Pelosi and the suspect both holding a hammer. The suspect pulled the hammer away from Mr. Pelosi and violently assaulted him with it. Our officers immediately tackled the suspect, disarmed him, took him into custody, requested emergency backup, and rendered medical aid.
Julian Marshall heard more from our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal.
This attack happened in the early hours, and we know that this alleged assailant broke into the house with a hammer. Police have confirmed that he then proceeded to attack Paul Pelosi with the hammer. But something that the police hasn't confirmed, but we are reporting, is that he went into the house and started shouting, "Where is Nancy? Where is Nancy?" It's also being reported here in the media that he planned to tie up Paul Pelosi whilst waiting for Nancy Pelosi to turn up. Now, the police then said that both the suspect and Paul Pelosi were taken to hospital. The suspect has now been charged with a range of charges, including attempted murder. He's been identified as David DePepe. In terms of Nancy Pelosi herself, she wasn't in the house. She divides her time between San Francisco and D.C. She is here in Washington, D.C. at the moment, where she has been working with the Democratic Party in order to fundraise and campaign ahead of the midterm elections, which are just under 2 weeks away. But it is an incident that has shocked lawmakers on both sides. There have been people, Republicans and Democrats, wishing Paul Pelosi a speedy recovery.
I mean, this is not the first time, if indeed she was the potential target, that Nancy Pelosi has been threatened, but possibly the closest that has come to harming her.
I would say that's probably true. Nancy Pelosi has talked a lot about the fear that lawmakers have about their safety, particularly after the Capitol riots. And earlier this year, a man was sentenced for threatening to shoot her. Last year, a man was appeared in court for for sending her death threats, basically. She is someone who, is an incredibly high-profile figure. She's pretty much second in line after the Vice President Kamala Harris to the presidency by law. And her home was actually attacked last year as well, but it's worth emphasising that there are also lawmakers on the other side, the Republican Party as well, who have been the focus of attacks as well. And in terms of, this suspect, we don't know much about him yet. There are various reports about him, having created websites in his name. We don't officially know if it's his, espousing right-wing conspiracy theories, the QAnon stuff, all that kind of thing that we have, we know that is going on in America. But as of yet, an official motivation hasn't been established.
Our correspondent, Nomia Iqbal. After hours of speculation about what Twitter's new owner might do, the billionaire Elon Musk has said no suspended accounts will be reinstated for now. The former US President Donald Trump welcomed the takeover of the social media site, saying it's now in sane hands. Mr. Musk said he wasn't consulted before Kanye West's account was restored, having been suspended because of anti-Semitic comments. And on Friday, the new owner explained more in a tweet, of course.
Twitter will be forming a content moderation council with widely diverse viewpoints. No major content decisions or account reinstatements will happen before that council convenes.
And later, Elon Musk tweeted that anyone suspended for a minor or dubious reason would be freed from Twitter jail. How easy will it be for him, though, to deliver on this promise of greater freedom of speech? Alexandra Geese is an MEP helping to draw up new rules to regulate big tech.
That's good news after announcing that he wanted totally free speech and including in this kind of free speech any kind of content, which would mean also threats and hateful speech. And we know that on platforms where such a policy is pursued, other groups have to leave because, for example, women are disproportionately targeted by hateful speech, or in Europe, people of color, for example, people with disabilities.
I heard more from our North America technology correspondent, James Clayton.
Elon Musk has tweeted about setting up a new council of some kind, which he says will be full of diverse voices, and they will decide what moderation or what content will stay up and what doesn't, and who is allowed on the platform and who isn't. Now, that obviously would suggest that someone else will decide whether Donald Trump will be allowed back onto Twitter rather than Elon Musk. Now, that's very interesting because Elon Musk said that Donald Trump would be allowed back onto the platform when he bought the company. So a little bit of confusion around that tweet. He's also tweeted that, I think he just tweeted saying, comedy is now legal. I think there was certainly some criticism that Twitter was over-moderating certain types of jokes. Once again, let's see how that works out in practice, because obviously there are some jokes that aren't that funny and can be racist, contain hate speech, contain all sorts of different accusations against different people. So let's see how that plays out in reality.
Do you think Twitter will be recognisable at the end of this?
Well, in the short term, Twitter's not going to change very much at all. In fact, from everything that I've seen from Elon Musk so far would suggest that it's going to have a fairly robust moderation policy. You know, he bought this because he said he was a free speech absolutist. His message to advertisers was, absolutely, it's going to have moderation. Don't worry, this isn't going to become a hellscape. You know, the message that he just put out on Twitter saying that actually there will be a committee that moderates free speech and what's allowed on and what's not. Facebook already has that. Facebook has the Facebook Oversight Board. So he's kind of reinventing the wheel here. There are reasons why Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and etc. all have moderation policies. It's because advertisers do not want to put their adverts in front of hate speech and in front of disinformation. And so what we're going to see in the short term, at least, I think, is not much change at Twitter.
Our North America technology correspondent, James Clayton. A member of the Russian parliament has reportedly said that newly mobilised troops are being sent to fight in Ukraine without proper training. His warning came just as the Russian defence minister claimed the army had now completed its call-up. Here's Paul Moss.
It was supposed to be a moment of celebration. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, was shown on television with Vladimir Putin, telling him all the army reservists they needed had now been mobilized and that 80,000 were already in Ukraine. But in a highly unusual intervention, a member of the country's parliament appears to cast doubt on this process. In a post shown on a regional news website, Maxim Ivanov claimed recruits were going in with almost no preparation. What's the point, he asked, sending an untrained lad to Donetsk, for example? It was, he said, unacceptable.
There are growing signs that the next major battle in Ukraine could be in the city of Kherson in the south. Another southern city, Mariupol, was a far more brutal fight. In May, Russia took the city after the last fighters defending the Azovstal steel plant surrendered. Among the Ukrainians taken prisoner were a number of women, some of whom had just been released in a prisoner swap. One of them was Victoria Obdina. My colleague Justin Webb asked how she came to be in Azovstal.
I worked as a nurse in a military hospital in Mariupol. On 10th of March, following my commander's order, I went to Azovstal plant to help the wounded. The place was heavily shelled and it was very scary. In our bunker, we had about 300 wounded people. It was difficult.
Your daughter was with you while all of this was happening. How did you manage to protect
her? Did you manage to protect her from what was going on around you?
She's a very smart, very mature girl. When I was working, she never distracted me. Of course, it was very scary at times when the shelling was very heavy. She asked, "Mom, is this our last day?" I comforted her, told her everything would be fine. We would be walking in a park one day.
Tell me about the moment then when you realized that you were going to be allowed out, albeit allowed out into the captivity of the Russians.
When Azovstal was the only place in the city not captured by Russians, we realized we would be captured. The Red Cross allowed me a phone call to my mother, who suggested my daughter should go to Zaporizhia. At a filtration point, I met another woman. She offered to help and take my daughter to Zaporizhia.
What was it like, though, when you had to say goodbye to your daughter and you went into captivity and your daughter to another place?
Of course, it was very hard, but I couldn't reveal my emotions. I told her everything would be fine and we would be reunited very soon, and I loved her so much. I put her on the bus and I was taken away.
When you were in captivity then, held by the Russians, how did they treat you? What did they say to you?
When we were split up, I was taken to the Mangush police station, where I was badly beaten. They tried to get an information about Ukrainian positions out of me. When they realized I wouldn't tell them anything, they put me in a cell. On May the 9th, they took me to Donetsk, where I was beaten again. I recorded an interview for the Russian media where I said everything was fine and asked to be reunited with my daughter. I didn't want to do that. I was forced.
And now you're free. Where is your daughter now, and how soon is it going to be that you meet her?
I am in a rehabilitation center in Dnipro. My daughter is in Poland. I will be able to get there in around a month's time. I miss her so much. We're talking via video every day.
A former resident of Azovstal, Victoria Obidna. Iranian state media say a person was shot dead on Friday in the southeastern city of Zahedan when what they described as unknown people opened fire. 14 others, including members of the security forces, were wounded. The protests follow the death of Masa Amini in the custody of the morality police. Whatever happens next, it's clear from the images and videos we've seen that something has changed in Iranian society. There are women who are leaving their homes without the headscarves they're required to wear, not as a one-off, but because they've set them aside despite the risks of doing so. We've been talking to one of the women who's been taking part in the protests. She's in her 30s, she lives in Tehran, and we're calling her Soraya.
For people, for their daily life, it has changed a lot. People are starting not to get afraid of what they want to say and how they want to choose their life, about their attitude, about what to wear, how to say and how to talk. This is changing from the very young generation to the grandmother's generation.
Our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette told me more about this new Iranian reality.
6 weeks ago, Iran was a different country. What we are seeing now with women casually strolling down the streets of Tehran, women in the underground station, women in cafeterias bareheaded, would have been unthinkable 6 weeks ago before this wave of protests started. It's absolutely extraordinary. And when you see what have now become iconic images, they just absolutely stunning, of 4 women on the pavement, bareheaded, facing a whole flanks of riot police, and there's a standoff between the two of them, and there are the women without covering with the compulsory hijab and fearlessly confronting security forces. They know that they could put it's against the law to go without compulsory hijab. So when it comes to that, Iran is a changed country, but of course it still is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
What we're hearing from Zahedan today, and I'm just seeing the newswires reporting that someone's been killed, 14 have been wounded in those scenes of unrest in that part of the country. It shows the authorities are absolutely determined to bring these protests to an end, but then they've been determined all these weeks and haven't done so yet.
The authorities are as determined as the protesters are, and they have not been able to quell this wave of anger. They've had to deal with protests before, but not protests like this, where it's hard to get a precise understanding of who is on the street where because of the internet crackdown. But predominantly it's Iranians, men and women under the age of 25, and many of the what's said to be some 13,000 in detention are said to be teenagers. And there are reports that there are those in the elite Revolutionary Guards who have not been deployed in full force yet, are uneasy to be mowing into crowds and doing what they've done at other times of protests, firing at point-blank range, when they're staring into the eyes of a young female teenager. So it's a real dilemma for the authorities, but they continue. Again today, they have described these as riots organized, provoked by the West. They are not giving an inch, not in terms of any compromises. It's a tacit compromise to let women go bareheaded. And not giving an inch when it comes to the crackdown. And they have much more in their arsenal that they can deploy if and when they want to.
Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. One of the leading figures of rock and roll, Jerry Lee Lewis, has died. He was 87. Our arts correspondent, David Silito, looks back at his colourful life.
Where did rock and roll come from? Satan, I guess.
Come on over, baby. Whole lot of shaking going on.
Whole lot of shaking, great balls of fire. In the 50s, rock and roll was the devil's music, and public enemy number one was Jerry Lee Lewis. He told his biographer Rick Bragg, "I ain't no teddy bear." Well, that was one way of putting it.
Come on over, baby. We got chicken in the corner. Oh, let's go.
His God-fearing Louisiana family had mortgaged their home to buy young Jerry a piano. His cousin was Jimmy Swaggart, who had gone to fame and disgrace as a TV evangelist. But Jerry Lee was thrown out of Bible college.
You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain.
His hair flying, his feet on the piano, his performances were wild, possessed. And off stage, on visits to his home, friends would count the bullet holes. No one asked why the bedroom door was reinforced with steel bars. Of course, he was used to scandal. His career had first fallen apart when it was at its peak in the late 50s. On a tour of Britain, he brought his new wife. He'd first got married aged 15. This, the third of 7 marriages, brought outrage. Myra Gale Brown was his cousin, his 13-year-old cousin.
When were you married? Pardon? When were you married? Well, we leave our personal questions out of this. All right. Well, good.
Questions were asked in Parliament. But it was far from the end of his career. He went on to reinvent himself as a country star. He was still performing in his 70s. His life was a barely believable trail of death, divorce, drink, guns, and burning Cadillacs. There was always God and gospel in the music, but after a life such as this, he probably knew where he was going.
Our arts correspondent David Silito on the life of Jerry Lee Lewis. And still to come.
Mondrian's artwork is famously abstract, and New York City one is no exception. A vivid geometric pattern made from intersecting strips of colourful adhesive tape.
The secret about a famous painting that art experts have missed for 75 years. We're into the final days of campaigning before Israelis head to the polls on Tuesday for their 5th election in 4 years. The current coalition is fighting to stay in power as the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu attempts a comeback. To do so, he's relying on the growing strength of an ultra-nationalist far-right alliance, including one of its leading figures, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's been seeing a surge of support. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Tom Bateman.
This is the sound of a new army of young voters in Israel putting their faith in ultra-nationalism. They're waiting for their hero. And enter from the far right, Itamar Ben-Gvir. The politician dances in circles, holding his activists' hands and the crowd's devoted attention. Ben-Gvir is the follower of a racist movement who wants to expel what he calls disloyal Arabs. In Israel's coming election, polls suggest his party could get more seats than ever for the extreme right.
Ben-Gvir electrifies his fans. They are excited because they feel they're on the verge of getting a lot stronger. A man who many felt could be kept to the fringes of Israeli politics could be about to enter its government.
Outside the rally, I try to ask him about his policies.
What will you do if you're Minister of Security, Mr. Ben-Gvir?
Listen, I love Israel and I'm not against all the Arabs. Just that the jihad. I against the jihad, the jihadist team. They won't kill me. Just a minute.
Why do you want to expel Palestinians?
They won't kill me and kill you, the jihadist team.
But why do you want to expel Palestinians who say to soil, Mr. Ben-Gvir?
Ben-Gvir agitates and often prefers the streets to the studios. Where tensions flare, he'll show up to pour on fuel, say his critics. Israel's elections have been deadlocked for 4 years now. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi, rallies his own base. He's nurtured the extreme right, hoping to boost coalition numbers for a return to power of his right-wing religious bloc. But a veteran observer of Israeli politics, the editor of the Jerusalem Post, Yaakov Katz, thinks this is a fateful moment.
It's a question of what type of democracy and what type of country does it want to have. On the one hand, you have forces like Itamar Ben-Gvir and his partner Bezalel Smotrich, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, who want to change the type of democracy that we have in the state of Israel, want to take us potentially into a dark moment.
והנה שני אלה שיסחטו אותו, ויהפכו את ביבי למריונטת ביטחון.
Election ads for members of the current Israeli coalition portray Netanyahu as a puppet to the far right, needing all the support he can get as he tries to swerve corruption charges, which he denies. The incumbents, led by Prime Minister Yair Lapid, are offering to continue a programme of change and say they're tough on security amid spiralling violence this year. Back at the rally, Ben-Gvir's fans think only his party can keep them safe. As the Israeli national anthem plays, Ben-Gvir sings. His opponents in this campaign have called him a pyromaniac. To his fans, he's a patriot. Israel's race to break its election deadlock sees a battle over how far the far right will reach.
Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman reporting. The Kenyan authorities have said they intend to charge 12 senior police officers with crimes against humanity for alleged offences committed during the 2017 election period. The officers are accused of numerous violations, including torture, sexual violence and murder. Here's our Africa regional editor Will Ross.
It's been 5 years since Kenyans learned about the killing of the baby Samantha Pendo in the city of Kisumu. Her mother said she was holding the 6-month-old in her arms when police officers burst through the door of her home wielding clubs. Samantha was hit on the head and died from her wounds. Finally, the perpetrators may be put on trial. Kenya's chief prosecutor has just said the police commanders behind the operation aimed at ending post-election violence should also face justice. It's hoped that this and several other high-profile trials could help stop the widespread incidents of police brutality in Kenya.
Scientists have discovered a new river beneath Antarctica that's longer than the English River Thames at around 460 kilometres. The researchers believe this shows the Antarctic ice sheet may be more susceptible to climate change than previously thought. The work's been an international collaboration involving researchers from Imperial College London, Newcastle University, University Malaysia and the University of Waterloo in Canada, where I spoke to Christine Dow, who's an expert in glacier hydrology and ice dynamics.
So it's not actually that large of volume. The volumes of water are fairly small. We're only talking about a few millimeters in most places, but the size of the catchment is huge. This is the size of Germany and France combined. So when you take that whole area, melting even just a small amount, you can grow really, really big rivers that can run for many, many miles into the ocean. And in Antarctica, it's not actually that important that the volume is small. It's all to do with how much friction there is at the base of the ice. Even a few millimeters can cause ice that's more than a kilometre thick to flow faster into the ocean. And a small change in that volume can make a huge difference.
How was it discovered?
This is a combination of numerical modelling and geophysics that we've been using to examine this system. So the hydrology models are applying physics, so we know that there's water at the base of the ice coming from heat from the earth and then friction from the ice above. And so as the base of the ice is melting, and we can put those volumes into our hydrology models and run them to see what kind of systems appear. And these large rivers have appeared, and then we made sure that they were definitely there by checking what the geophysics was showing us from the fieldwork.
And in terms of what it tells us about the ice cap and what might happen to it, just put that into context for me.
So what these systems mean is that sea level rise will likely be faster than we're currently predicting. And the reason for that is because we know that small volumes of water can cause the ice to flow faster, but it's also very important for a critical region called the grounding line. And this is where the ice begins to float on the ocean, where the Antarctic ice sheet meets the ocean. If this grounding line moves inland, all of that ice that was on land begins to float and adds immediately to sea level. And our rivers that are pumping fresh water into the ocean, they're mixing with that warm ocean water, buoyantly moving it up and melting the ice. That is causing the grounding line to retreat even faster inland. So the more fresh water into the ocean, the more melt, the faster that grounding line will retreat and the faster sea level will rise.
And if this continues unabated, will Antarctica become like a landmass, like, I don't know, like Greenland or something like that?
Well, so Antarctica currently is on land. A lot of it is below sea level, but it's fully covered in ice at the moment. So the big difference between Antarctica and Greenland is Antarctica is very cold and wintry still. There's no melt at all on the surface. So all of this water that we're talking about is coming from the base of the ice. However, on Greenland, you've got a lot of melt on the ice surface, and that water can make its way through hundreds and hundreds of meters of ice to the bed. And in the future, over the next few decades to 100 years, we may have a similar system in Antarctica. We may have melt on the surface. And if that adds water to the base of the ice, it could change everything. It could change what we know about the systems that currently exist. But at the moment, we don't know how. We're really unsure about how that's going to change the hydrology. And that's a very important question, one that my research group is actively looking into answer to try and get better predictions of sea level rise in the future.
Dr. Christine Dow with me from Canada. Curators in Germany have discovered something very wrong about one of the most famous artworks by the Dutch painter Piet Mondrian. The painting, which is made up of a complex lattice of coloured stripes that depicts the New York skyline, has been on public display for 75 years. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill takes up the story.
Mondrian's artwork is famously abstract, and New York City One is no exception. A vivid geometric pattern made from intersecting strips of colourful adhesive tape. But for more than 70 years, the piece has been displayed upside down, and no one appears to have noticed. Not in New York's Museum of Modern Art, where it was first exhibited after the artist's death, nor at the German State Gallery of North Rhine-Westphalia, which later acquired the work. But then a sharp-eyed curator looked closely at an old photograph of Mondrian's studio. Susanna Meyer-Buser spotted New York City One on the artist's easel, placed the other way up. That, she said, caught her attention. So using a cardboard replica, she flipped the piece around. It worked, she said, incredibly well. Suddenly it had more plasticity, more depth. Despite her discovery, sticklers for historical accuracy may be disappointed. The adhesive strips are now so sensitive that to display the artwork the correct way round would likely risk its disintegration. Of course, some might argue they couldn't tell the difference anyway.
Jenny Hill in Berlin. And that's all from us for now. There will be a new edition of Global News to download later. If you'd like to comment on this edition of the podcast, do drop us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. And you'll find us on Twitter too, @GlobalNewsPod. This edition was mixed by Russell Newlove. The producer was Leah McSheffrey. The editor is Karen Martin. My name's Andrew Peach. Thank you for listening. And until next time, goodbye.